Welcome to the Aural Apothecary Live. It's a podcast about medicine, storytelling, and healthcare. People of data, you know you're in the right place. Look, I just walked into the building and I heard this quote: your data is stored in a Python file. Not many conferences you're hearing that. Let's give you the numbers. The Aural Apothecary, over 80 episodes. This is our 7th live show. Cardiff, London, Lisbon, Bordeaux, and now Oxford. So thank you very much for involving us and inviting us. We're downloaded and listened to in over 60 countries around the globe. We've had Apple Top 10 medical podcast moments too. So what's coming up? What can you expect? In a short while, we will be joined on stage by your very own Professor Ben Goldacre. Ben will get to share a desert island drug, a career anthem, and a book for the Aural Apothecary Library. So as you're sitting there now, I just would like you to set those three thinking now. Maybe what, and we will come to you later in the show, what would your desert island drug be? So it's a drug that has an emotional attachment to you, okay? That's something that might have been your PhD, might have been the research you presented yesterday. Don't know if all us here, but her work on lithium, for example. So she told us in one of the many pubs we visited last night that lithium, it's lithium. My desert island drug is lithium. So yeah, have a think. And also, as Ben gets to share his choices, many of you here and in the cheap seats up there, perhaps you think you know Ben. So I'd just like you to scribble down if you think you know what Ben might choose for his desert island drug, his career anthem, and his story. Before we go any further, let me welcome my two fellow apothecaries. STC is in Oxford, and Gimo is in Oxford. Welcome both.
Hello.
How are you? Yes. How are you enjoying conference?
Very good, although I'm feeling a bit rough this morning, if I'm honest. I think somebody might have led us to rather one too many pubs last night. So yeah, tumbling into my top of the Jesus College, like what was like a put-up bed, was a bit tough at 1:45 this morning. So I was glad that we had lots of coffee. But Ben said at the beginning about, and we all know this if you've ever been to conferences, it is about the IRL, isn't it? So in real life. And so he said something like, make sure you have, I think you said 5. He said, make sure you have 5 conversations. So I wrote down mine in relation to that. So I had a great chat with Frank Moriarty, who I knew because I knew he was a deprescribing researcher, and that's an area that I'm interested in. I'd never met him before, so that was great. Who didn't love Caroline Copeland, learning from the dead? She's definitely going to be an Aural Apothecary podcast guest. We've already asked her. I managed to have dinner with, sat next to Dr. John Robinson, who is a SNOMED DMD aficionado, and I had quite a heated discussion with Merlin Dunlop from Ardens about alert fatigue. So the question that was asked about alert fatigue was me, and as somebody who is a clinician, I work in general practice now, I worked in hospital for 25 years, and I have an interest in medication safety. I said to him, you're not going to like this. I said, but I'm getting to the stage where I'm actually thinking about how do we turn these off. That's how bad it's become. And so it was quite a combative conversation. I don't think he's here. But hopefully, we both sort of took something away from that. And the last thing was, and I can't remember his name and I couldn't find it, but the excellent medical student who did the presentation about tenecteplase. And again, I found him afterwards and I said, so what did you learn most about doing it yourself? And he said, well, I couldn't believe that Manchester, Birmingham, and 2 of the 4 parts of London had not adopted, this new, much quicker and therefore potentially more effective. And I said to him, welcome to the world of spread of innovation and how difficult it is to get people to what looks like a great idea with good evidence, and yet why is it you can do it in these centres but you can't do it in that? I said, you'll be learning that for the rest of your career. So those are my highlights. Quite a lot, but we've got lots of time.
Yeah, we've got some time. Gimo?
Well, there was a GP yesterday who spoke about quality improvement, and so I'm a pharmacist, but I work in quality improvement. And when we go in to support teams, the first question we ask is, show me the data. And what happens? They've got lots of data, but they never use it. They don't know how to use it, and the data's not very good. And actually, quality improvement is founded in data. So one of the sort of, I suppose, founders or godfathers of quality improvement, for want of a better word, is W.E. Deming. And he said, I think he said this, I might be misattributing it, in God we trust, all others must bring data. And so he said that the central problem in management and leadership is that failure to understand the information in variation, and that was in 1982. And so here we are in 2025, and I would suggest that still is the same issue. So it's great, we love data in pharmacy, and I think quality improvement and data go together.
Remember, we're not a pharmacy podcast. Right?
No, we're a
Definitely
medicines
not.
podcast.
Okay.
What about you, James?
Well, I would go to a conversation again, and this is a good old-fashioned conference, and I said this to Ben as we left at 1:45 in the early hours from the Half Moon, proper conference. We had a conversation with Colm, one of your PhD colleagues, and he was just telling us, and I thought, well, this would never have happened if we weren't if we hadn't
The Half Moon
for that final one. Just a great conversation with him and a colleague actually about their PhDs. One was, I forget what gentleman's name, was doing his PhD by portfolio, but Colm's work on clinicians and guidelines sounded great. So it was a pleasure to catch up with somebody, and so thanks Ben and the team for putting on such a great couple of days. Okay.
Should we just, before we get Ben up,
Yeah.
should we just sort of say that we set up this podcast during COVID because we were a bit bored, and it's been running for 5 years. So yeah, we've done all those episodes, but just so that you know, and it's kind of an in-joke, we always say it's not a pharmacy podcast, although we're 3 pharmacists, but the issue, or the way that we think about it is that I'm still a clinician, Gimo's in improvement science, and Jamie does a lot of coaching. So we come at it in three different ways. But in relation to being pharmacists, being sort of planners and preparing, I was thinking before about what's current in relation to medicines and coding. Hey presto, you may have seen in the last couple of weeks the alert from NHS England about asking organisations to look to see how many people have had an allergic reaction noted for penicillamine.
Holding up Exhibit A.
Did anybody see this alert? And so this is fascinating because we were actually doing another conference at the RPS nearly 2 years ago, and somebody high up from the NHS patient safety team, because I did some time there, contacted me and said, Steve, can I have a word? I think we've got an issue. And so, you're in practice, can you have a look for me? And so penicillamine and penicillin, they sound similar, don't they? So if you all know about sound-alike, look-alike errors and human error, so what's happened is that in the worst-case scenario, they found one case where somebody had been recorded as having an adverse drug reaction to penicillamine, which is a chelating agent, which is not used very much at all. So being prepared, I asked Open whether or not they could tell me, and only about 400 people in the last 12 months have actually been prescribed penicillamine, in England, only 400. And then when we looked at the Open to look at the number of codes as to how many people have been coded as having an allergic reaction or an adverse drug reaction to penicillamine, it's nearly 8,000 people. So all of a sudden you can see the scale, the importance of data, but the scale of we have a problem. So in our practice, which is 20,000 patients, we had 5. So, and in Dorset, which is only 800,000, when we've looked at the data because we all use TPP, I'm being told that we've got 222 people in Dorset. And that's, if you rank that up to 60 million people, that's 16,000 people. And the point is that what has happened in most of these, because I kind of did a bit of a root cause analysis on ours, is usually an administrative person who's like where notes have come in, and they're meaning to put penicillin, but penicillamine has come up first on the list, and then they've been tagged with that for all of that time. And of course, what happened in the worst case scenario where the child died is because they're not, there is no cross-reactivity between them. So they thought that this person had a reaction to penicillamine, but it was actually penicillin. They then gave them penicillin, they had an anaphylactic reaction, and they died. So there's my connecting code and real life around medicine. So that's my story.
Yeah, and just before David Webb got up yesterday evening to do his keynote around the day off, I just said to him, I said, God, aren't medicines fascinating, David? After all the stories we heard yesterday, the lithium, the coroners, and then the penicillamines as well. And, we were still talking about methotrexate, weren't we? Earlier in the day. So, yeah, aren't medicines fascinating? That's why we do it. Okay, shall we welcome our guest then? Look, he's been a generous host for the last couple of days, known to all in the room, I'm sure, but for the benefit of our listeners who will be listening back on this in those 60 countries around the world, let's give him an introduction. He's heard it many times before, but so bear with me, Ben. Let's read what you've written about yourself.
Was it AI? Did AI do it?
Ben is a doctor, academic, writer and broadcaster. He trained in medicine at Oxford and UCL, in psychiatry at the Maudsley, and in epidemiology at LSHTM. His academic and policy work is in informatics, epidemiology and evidence-based medicine, where he works on various problems, including variation in care, better uses of routine collected electronic health data, evidence-based social policy, access to clinical trial data, efficient trial design, and retracted papers. More importantly, look, he runs the Bennett Institute for Applied Data Science, a multidisciplinary team of academics, clinicians, and software developers, all pooling skills and knowledge to turn large data sets into tools and services, as well as pure academic research papers. Sounds great, doesn't it? We've all read his books as well. I'll stop there. Please welcome, put your hands together, generous round of applause to Professor Ben Goldacre. Come over here, friend Ben. Thank you.
Do I have to stand up for an hour?
You do, which might be, yes, a challenge. You might be all right, but we'll see.
I'm looking forward to it.
So, welcome, Ben. You must be, let's start with, and we've heard it a little bit. I felt some emotion yesterday from you and some of your colleagues as we were celebrating 10 years of open prescribing. What are the standout moments that you'd like to share with the room, but our listeners as well, as this goes to a wider audience?
Well, I suppose the most amazing thing about open prescribing is that it exists at all. It took 3 years of fighting to get £47,000 that one academic health sciences network found down the back of a sofa in March, just at the end of the financial year. And then with one developer, the fantastic Anna Powell-Smith, we were able to get something up on the internet very quickly, which is really very similar to what we have today. I sometimes obviously look at people's CVs who are looking for work in the world. And one thing that you see in academics who work on these kinds of things is often a series of projects that are funded for 18 months or 36 months, and then they stop. And the thing about open prescribing, which is thanks to the indefatigability of people like Brian McKenna and Richard Croker and Seb and everyone who's worked here over the last 10 years, is that they never died. We always found a way to borrow from one thing to keep another alive and to keep pestering and fighting. And there it is. And that's how you build a community as well. If you have something for 36 months, that's not long enough for people to notice that you've even begun to start thinking about the problem. But if you're there for 10 years, then it kind of beds in. We
call it pilotitis. The things start, they're fantastic, they gather evidence, but then no one's prepared to fund it, and the ones that succeed aren't based on evidence, it's based on enthusiasm.
Yeah, well, and also I think repetition and habit is obviously one of the most fundamental ways that you change the world. I mean, from all the dreadful self-help books about the power of habit, but you can also see it in, I suppose, in the prescribing data. I mean, the thing that's really striking about all the graphs everybody looked at yesterday is that you see the red line showing one organisation very slowly reducing its bad prescribing or less desirable prescribing and moving towards the current evidence-based or current best data on safety. But what's almost always happening is everybody is catching up eventually. It's just that people are doing it at different paces, and that's just about norms and ideas spreading at their own pace.
It goes back to the point about the spread, with the medical student and the tenectoplays. It's lovely to hear that people still use the term, looking at the data and they go, oh, the data fell off a cliff at that point. So we're all clear on that, aren't we? But falling off a cliff on data points, or when Brian McKenna, also who's been on the Aural Apothecary, and Jess Morley, who used to be at the Bennett Institute, have already been on the Aural Apothecary, just a plug for that. But when we were talking about that kind of stuff with Brian, and he was saying about when you looked at the midazolam usage during COVID, and how the charts just went whoosh like that because of all the extra midazolam that was being used when people were being, ventilated and such like.
Well,
so it was quite striking.
Yeah, and also really upsetting. I mean, I think I'm often surprised and disappointed by humanity. But in particular, people often like to say things like, "Oh, it's all about stories," and you've got to make things real with stories. I don't think I've ever really felt that myself. When you see data,
yeah, you're on the wrong podcast then. We're about stories, but no, carry on.
No, but I think there is a sort of natural and obvious empathic leap. You can see in the data, you can see in the graphs and pictures of what's happening across the country.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is real, in some cases, avoidable suffering and death, or sometimes, in the case of the pandemic, much of it unavoidable pain and suffering and death. And Austin Bradford Hill used to call mortality tables tragedies with the tears wiped off.
Yeah.
And I don't think they are wiped off. I think when you see it, you see it. It's in the numbers.
So we've used that quote. That's the third time the quote has been mentioned in 85 episodes.
Did we all slightly misquote him differently?
Yes,
Great.
We'll put a hybrid together and we will get it right. And so what right it looks like, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen the most recent Chief Medical Officer's report looking at about infections. And there's a stunning infographic, isn't there, Jonathan? Maybe we should have got it up. But do go away and have a look at it. It's a stunning infographic that's been put together about how many people have died throughout history, whether it's Spanish flu, Russian flu, number of people who've died due to HIV. And it's absolutely incredible, isn't it? Because the blob for COVID is actually dwarfed by Spanish flu massively. A number of people have died, probably, HIV, we're assuming a lot of those were in Africa. But it's so powerful. But like you say, it shows you, in this case, all of those people died.
Well, and if you were a time traveller going backwards, you wouldn't take a ray gun, you'd take broad-spectrum antibiotics. I mean, the extent to which you could just get a cut in your arm and that'd be the end of you 6 weeks later, it's just terrifying, really.
Yeah.
Just on broad-spectrum antibiotics, I have to remind people that we do have Aural Apothecary alumni in the room as well. Jonathan Underhill is sat over there, and Diane Asheru-Orodopper, one of our keynotes from yesterday, is a very proud member of Aural Apothecary alumni as well, just on the broad-spectrum antibiotics. Before I come over to Steve, who wants to take you back in time a little bit, I'll take you back to yesterday, okay? These aren't all yours. But for the people who were here yesterday, so I made some actionable insights. That's what came up in some of those conversations yesterday, okay? You can come back on some of these when I've finished, okay? The grimy back end was, I would describe the back end of open prescribing and open, I think that's what you were talking about. Question for the audience, look, Ben mentioned this yesterday. He didn't quite have the answer yesterday, or he didn't want to share it with us. I think he probably did. But when he was describing a specific, creating an immaculate CV, that's what he was telling us, wasn't he, about the people that get to work in the organisation, that they are in real time creating an immaculate CV, a specific set of skills. What was the movie that Ben was looking for yesterday? Taken. A specific set of skills I've acquired over a very long career, skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. We can't keep admiring the problem was from Diane, which I loved. And then this one I would like you to sort of just expand on a bit. Charisma plus persuasion plus data to change practice. You did say it yesterday, I assure you. Okay, so charisma plus persuasion plus data to change practice. Can you just talk through that one, what you were thinking?
Well, so I think a lot of what you see in the graphs and the discussions over the last day is that medicine tells a story to itself about itself, that it's very much data and evidence driven. And we've obviously made huge leaps from the era of people just pontificating. But it's in particular the last yards that I think we still fall short. So we invest huge amounts of time and effort through funding people to identify uncertainties and then do clinical trials to resolve uncertainties and then do systematic reviews to summarize all the clinical trials and then do cost effectiveness reviews in NICE. And all of these projects have enormous cost and crew around them. But then when it comes to actually communicating that to clinicians at the coalface and getting change implemented, what you see is something much closer to a kind of folk oral tradition in the very slow dissemination of information, often by word of mouth or by happenstance. And that's not the fault of any of the individuals. That's a structural failure in the information architecture of healthcare, I suppose, but it's a structural failure, really, of the state and our healthcare systems. And it's very easily resolvable, and we already have a good model of how to do it. So the medicines optimization teams are, I think, an amazing model of how you could do data-driven dissemination of new knowledge and insights, data-driven targeting of information interventions to clinicians. And it's basically people going out and being good at building relationships with clinicians, knowing when is the right time to bring something up, because all of the data in open prescribing shows there are no clusters. There are really not really bad doctors. Almost every practice is good at almost everything, but almost every practice has a couple of things that they've fallen short on, and often there will be good reasons for that. And sometimes it'll be they've got other fish to fry. I mean, it's a reality of the world. You might be dealing with some massive upheaval or some massive constellation of problems that have all presented to you simultaneously. And so you're not going to really sit down and think about your green inhalers. Maybe not this year, and that might be okay. In MedSop teams, you have people who build relationships, who know their people, who know when the right time is to talk about the right thing, and then also who know about data, so they know how to spot the problems that are most worth talking to people about, and they know how to talk to people about that data and how to then monitor in the data whether the conversations and the persuasion that they've engaged in has had its impact. Now, there are two things we could do with that. One is we could take that model and apply it to all other aspects of care, guideline compliance on things that aren't just prescribing. Prescribing is a big part of what doctors and clinicians and health services do, but it's not all that we do. The second thing is you could pack more resource into it, because you can see that the speed with which information gets out to clinicians is often really very, very faltering. And the last thing you could do is you could level up, because the amazing thing about the MedSops community is it is itself kind of an oral tradition. There is no standardized training or JD or conference or textbook. People were instructed a couple of decades ago, you should do this kind of work. And as a consequence, very understandably, there are some teams where they're really good at charisma, persuasion, and relationships. There are some teams where they're really good at data. There are some teams where they're really good at both. And the ones that are good at these things are often different in how they're good at it. And so creating a proper structure around a profession like that, in the way that we have around being a clinician or being a teacher, it obviously makes sense. And I think that's the next big leap for healthcare.
And for those of us, there are some of us in the room who were around at the sort of beginning of the medicines optimization movement. It did start with data. It started with creation of prescribing data, didn't it? And looking at that data and using it to tell stories to GPs about their prescribing. And I sort of, with my slight hangover this morning, I was reading through the report that you were part of, or you wrote, was it 2019, I think? Or was it later? Anyway, one of the things you called in there for was an NHS data analyst service. Is that right?
It was the Goldacre report.
Oh,
the
yeah,
Goldacre report.
2022.
And Smalley, yeah.
I was just picking up on what you said about, so I work in the NHS in quality improvement, and to find a data analyst in the trust I work in with 13,000 staff is nigh on impossible. And when you do find them, they're quite detached and distinct from the service. And where I've seen examples of real success, as in medicines optimization, is when they're embedded in the teams. So I know the answer, but I guess one of the things is where are we and how can we get better at embedding those roles and what you're creating here in the Bennett Institute, but making sure they're embedded within the service?
Well, I think that's what pharmacy teams that now work in practices rather than in the old days working in CCGs. That is exactly it. So that's the world in which
we need that across all services.
Yeah, because all of those things that you said, okay, and obviously vitamin M, or money, incentive schemes, that shifts the dial, okay? But it shifts it, and then if you take it away, there was, again, something I was reading this morning about the number of medication reviews that have been done in moderate and severely frail people in care homes, and 2 years ago when there was an incentive to do it, huge numbers done, okay, like 75% of the population. 2 years later, there's no vitamin M anymore. It's gone down to like 30%. So all of those things that you said, and certainly in practice, people, they feel sometimes with data that it's being used to performance manage them, and clinicians don't like to be performance managed. I'm sure. Well, do you agree?
I think one of the biggest problems with using financial incentives attached to measures of clinical practice is that you can only do it for a very small number of measures, which are essentially never events. You know, if you didn't do this to this particular type of patient, then you're probably not very good at doing medicine.
Yeah.
And actually, the vast overwhelming majority of useful feedback that you would give to a clinician is not like that. We don't really have a word for this second class. We've got performance measures or metrics or indicators for the more never-eventy type stuff. But most of what you want to tell clinicians is, just to let you know, we think there might be a problem, but this is for you to judiciously examine in the context of what you know about your patients and your practice. So for example, you might find that somebody's a really high user of high-dose opioids or benzodiazepines. Now that might mean that they're a soft touch and they've got a very low threshold for prescribing. It's actually quite likely that the opposite is true, that they are the local hero who's taken all of the local substance misuse people on. Now, if you attach a financial penalty to that, you're obviously creating ludicrous adverse incentives against. If you try and create some elaborate exceptions framework or fanciful way of correcting for population in the data, you're likely to do as much harm as you do good by that. And so I think we need a new word for data that you give to people for feedback that is for them to judiciously and professionally use, that is not in the category of, if you haven't scored well on this, you're a bit crap. Yeah. And you can't attach payments to that. You have to find other ways of doing it.
Yeah. We call it data for improvement, but that's a bit crap as well, I think. But that's the term that's the constant battle we have, is trying to persuade people that when we collect, that's why I go, my first point about you going to a team after data, they instantly think you want to beat them up with it.
Yeah, and I mean, there are invisible design choices that we made at the very outset in open prescribing to try and hold that off. And the simple ones are obviously the narrative around each measure. So we don't have measures that just go, this is good, this is bad, see you later, bye. There's a decent text description of what the measure is intending to do and any relevant caveats around it. But also, at a more technical level, you will notice that you cannot, for example, sort by all practices in the country to find, in quotes, the worst, because we know that that would be a fatuous thing to do. Yeah. And also at high risk of misuse by a kind of flyby attack from a journalist or a think tank who don't fully understand the data in its context. So you can make design choices in how you present things, both in narrative and in the design of a platform, that make it more likely to make it easy for people to do good things and hard for them to do bad things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. I think, Steve, do you want to take Ben through his paces on the...
Well, we've obviously talked about I call it your open period.
Yeah.
But we must, for the listener, I'm now holding up, we are fanboys of you. So this is Bad Pharma, which Ben wrote, and he used to write in The Guardian, didn't you? And he used to write Bad Science and all those. So we all love Bad Pharma. So as I was reading it on the train...
I brought mine with me.
Oh, okay. He's got the Guardian letters, and I will get you to sign this. But actually, you made it really easy, because you, at the end of each section, you said, and what can we do about this? So I was going to ask you, this is your 13-year appraisal meeting, okay? So 13 years after this came out, and you could be quick fire on this. The first one was around missing data, and I'll make it, you have set up all trials, haven't you? You and others.
Yeah, we set up the All Trials campaign to try and get people to do the right thing, and lots of people briefed against us, publicly and privately, often in quite grisly ways. And then privately, very senior people from the pharmaceutical industry began leaking documents to me.
Went to grimy back ends again,
through
aren't we?
Through their grimy back end, yeah. And started to befriend us and have very pragmatic conversations with us. GSK signed up to the All Trials campaign very early on, after, I must say, a real grilling from Andrew Whitty in a private members club in Soho. That he didn't look like a person who was about to sign up to the All Trials campaign, and he was, poking at every corner. And then 36 hours later said, "Okay, we've looked at it. We think we can do this pretty cheaply, and it's in our interest. So we're signing up straight away." And then we set up the Trials Tracker project, which you can see at trialstracker.net, which is live, real-time, data-driven reporting on every clinical trial registered on clinicaltrials.gov or the EU Clinical Trials Registry, checks whether it's been reported in line with its legal requirements, and then has rankings by sponsor of every company and every university, looking at how they've complied. And since we launched that, compliance from pharma in particular has shot up. Compliance from British clinical trial conducting universities has shot right up. Across Europe, it's quite poor, and the big difference is, in the UK, the Science and Tech Select Committee worked with our audit data, contacted the dean of every medical school in the country and said, "We will be inviting you in. We'll be getting the 3 best performers and the 3 worst performers to come and give oral evidence in front of the Select Committee in 6 months' time, and here's your data from the Trials Tracker project." Now, nobody enjoys being hauled up in front of a Select Committee. The day after this went out, by the way, it was Medical Schools Council, and a friend of mine who's a dean in another university, who's on Medical Schools Council, sent me a message saying, "I've just come back from Medical Schools Council, your name was Mud, lol." But almost instantly, we've seen this enormous improvement in clinical trial reporting in the UK, and I think that is good for UK PLC, because everybody is constantly fretting about how we can get a bigger slice of the global clinical trials market. We will never be able to compete on cost per patient for clinical trials with Brazil, Russia, India, and China, but we will be able to compete on trustworthiness, and the whole point of doing a clinical trial is to produce trustworthy evidence.
Yeah.
And the trial reporting data for the UK shows that it is the most trustworthy place to do your science.
Yeah. So massive tick for you on you fixed that in relation to missing data. Next up was bad regulators. MHRA, all trials need to be against the gold standard. Any progress on that?
So I can't remember exactly what I said about regulators 13 years ago. I feel like I've learned a lot in the last 10 years in particular about how big organizations work, including from running one.
Yeah.
And you do have to be forgiving and understanding. They're not people. Big organizations and bureaucracies are actually, they're a bit like LLMs, they're a bit like AI. They feel like people, they sort of act like people, they sort of feel like they have beliefs and desires, and they've sort of abstracted out human behavior into a set of rules and machinery that you can then interact with, but they also manage to make decisions that are perverse or irrational and hallucinate in the same way that LLMs do. I should say that's not my snappy line, by the way. That's from David Runciman, political scientist.
Oh, yeah.
I think the thing that I would observe in the MHRA is a bit like the drunk person walking home from the pub who's lost their keys, only looking for them in the spaces around the pools of light from the street lamps. They do a really, really thorough job on about 10% of the problems.
Yep.
And if you try and engage people in the 90% that's not being engaged with, they, and also not, in some respects unreasonably, pharma, say, well, God, haven't we got enough regulation? And the problem with that is you don't measure your regulation in its quantity. You measure it in how efficient and accurate it is at managing the problems, rather than how much of it there is.
Yeah.
So I think, managing...
It was always going to be a tricky one.
managing government engaging with complex technical questions, I think, is really, really different to managing government around a more straightforward bit of delivery, like, can you run a job centre, can you run a school? Those forms of logistics, I think, have got much larger workforces of people that understand the material substance of the work. When it comes to anything to do with tech, and it's the same with all our work in data infrastructure as well, I think government doesn't really know how to engage with new forms of technical complexity, and so they really struggle. And you can see that they hire in particular for people with generalist senior management skills and leadership skills, which I value really highly as a specialist skill. But if you don't have people in senior roles who have technical skills and knowledge, then an element of kind of panic sets in, an element of groupthink. Oh, we'll just set up a few panels. They'll meet for 3 hours every 3 months. We'll take the sort of centroid of all of their views, because we don't really know how to adjudicate if they disagree with each other. And so government working with novel forms of technical complexities is the great challenge of our age, because the things that matter are novel and technical now. You know, you've got to run schools, of course, you've got to keep all of that going, but the things that matter are, can you engage competently with data science, data infrastructure, how to make the best of AI when it's a real mixed bag, and in some ways part of your strategy has to be how you manage a bubble, as well as how you manage the subset of things it is claimed to do, which it can do. And I think government knows how to employ a lawyer or an economist or a doctor, but if you show up at government and say, I'm an expert in data, it's kind of a roll of the dice.
Yeah. I'll give you one more, and that was one more was on marketing and conflicts of interest.
Well, I think there's been a lot of change in the UK, at least, on transparency of reporting of that. And it's much less common to see the kinds of really flamboyant displays of come to this conference in Hawaii. I'm looking around the room at people who are closer to this sort of thing now than I was without naming them or without obviously foveating them.
I can see some.
What do you reckon?
I can see some.
I think internationally, I think it can still be a bit grimy. I think locally it has changed a fair bit. But I would say this is very closely connected to what we were talking about earlier with meds op teams. So fundamentally, the argument in Bad Pharma was not drug companies are bad and evil and wrong. The argument of Bad Pharma was the information architecture of evidence-based medicine is a flawed, shambolic, ad hoc network of things that were half invented half a century ago or more, stitched together in a spirit of optimism and with your hands over your eyes to stop seeing the gaps. Medicine is not set up to be a properly data and evidence-driven profession. You can see that in the painfully slow adoption of new treatment guidance, of new treatments that are shown to be effective, of new safety alerts even, let alone price shocks. And so if we as a profession, and if the state doesn't do a good job of disseminating information to clinicians to help them make informed choices driven by the evidence, then it is not surprising that A, what's left is a bit chaotic, and B, into that chaos, the people who are selling the drugs will have quite an easy ride because they haven't got any competition, or they haven't got enough competition from people disseminating unbiased.
And just to finish on that, I would say that have a listen to the episode we did with your former colleague, Jess Morley, because that's what we get into when we were looking at how AI might transform the healthcare space, but that the state of the data that we're using to teach AI was really what we came down on, and it was. I'd recommend that as a really good chat, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we talked to Margaret
Yes.
McCartney about conflicts of interest as well. So, but anyway, well done for writing.
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
yes.
I'll ask you to sign it for me afterwards, if that's all right.
And just to go on, we'll come back to Steve now for the choices, but so Bad Science, Bad Pharma. This is the one that I don't think people know as much about. This is your columns from the Guardian, for Bad Science in the Guardian over the years. What I just found in the middle there.
An old fiver?
An old pound.
Oh, God.
This is the guy that finds money every week, right? He finds money anywhere, on the street, in his suit pocket, you name it. He's known
reading
for it.
that again, and just browsing through that, it was almost the manifesto for for open prescribing, open safely, isn't it? As I could see it building in the frustration in some of your columns over the years, which I can remember reading in real time in the Guardian. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed them. And again, I just thought, I thought, well, I'll just get back into it, and it was great.
Well, look, I mean, the shtick is consistent in the sense that, well, firstly, I am a sort of multi-generational academic and second-generation epidemiologist, and almost everybody in my immediate family works in public health or epidemiology one way or another. I think the objective has always been to use the tools of epidemiology to try and make the world better through ideally any vehicle other than writing papers, mainly because they're a kind of necessary output. They're sometimes a very useful way of communicating stuff, but they're often a bit self-serving and pointless. They just sit as a PDF on a server, sometimes behind a loop.
And reviewer 2 is always difficult.
True. But yeah, I mean, the shtick has always been how to get better use of data and evidence in society. And I would say, if you're thinking about how to do the most good in the world, how to, in your 3 school years and 10 or whatever.
4,000 weeks.
Yeah. Thanks for that terrifying update. I think if you want to try and reduce the amount of suffering and death in the world, there are very, very few new treatments coming that are going to have as big an effect as optimizing the logistics of the delivery of care that we already have. Diabetes specialist nurses used well are probably going to be more impactful than the next third-line anti-diabetes drug. And secondly, I think anything you can do by yourself with your hands, artisanally, is great, and it's often really directly personally rewarding to do something yourself with one person. But if you can make machines, I think the lesson of the Industrial Revolution is, if you can create machines that radically reduce the cost of every intervention, if you can make machines like Open Safely and Open Prescribing that enable lots of other people to do work, especially if you can design them in such a way that they'll do work in line with your vision of what best practice looks like, and with guide rails that prevent them doing bad things, then you can really, you can make a much bigger dent. And, you only do that if you have a posse, and we do now have a posse. And I'm appalled to see them here, having to listen to me witter on for the first time.
Here is the posse. Look, I put them on the screen for you. Look, if you look on the back, this
well,
is...
that's a small fragment of the posse.
It's
a big number now.
And so for the listener, look, the book I was referring to, there's Bad Science and Bad Pharma that Steve has just mentioned, but this is, I think you'll find it's a bit more complicated than that, which is a collection of Ben's
columns. Could you be more sanctimonious? I mean,
Don't worry, we're going to make it hard for you.
Come on then, let's go on.
We're going to make it hard for you now.
Let's go on to your choices.
So I was just thinking, actually, just because the audience are here, shall I do my true or false coding questions so that people can take part?
Very quick, go on.
And then we'll go to Ben and his 3 choices.
Yeah.
Okay. So true or false? I was talking to John last night about SNOMED, and I love it and hate it. 500,000 codes. Are these true or false actual codes found in the coding from 24-25? Bitten by crocodile or alligator? True or false? True. Accidentally caught in ironing board? True. Head stuck in vice? False. War injury due to crushing by falling aeroplane? True. Collision of spacecraft with meteorite? True. Difficulty swallowing pills?
True.
True. Accident caused by explosion of pressure cooker? True, indeed it is. Dog bite of genitalia? That is false, but human bite of genitalia is in SNOMED codes.
Very good. Very good. He's been wanting to play that quiz for years, so he's finally found an audience that would appreciate it.
Just waiting for the right crowd, wasn't he?
And you've delivered, folks, so thank you. Come on then. Yeah. Let's take Ben through his Desert Island Drug, his career anthem, and his book.
Yes, okay, so the first thing, hopefully, I know you will have thought about this, we spoke to you last night, and we take these live. So the first thing that everybody gets to give us if they've been a guest is a Desert Island Drug, so something that has a powerful memory for you, like a Desert Island Disc, if you were on the radio show, which you might have even been on, I don't know, we didn't check that, no.
Not yet.
So this is your, poor man's relation. What would you like to give us as your Desert Island Drug for the Aural Apothecary formulary?
Well, following your instructions, I think probably risperidone.
Okay.
So when I was a junior doctor working in psychiatry, it was at the beginning of the transition from old antipsychotics to novel antipsychotics, where the ambition, and to be fair, it's realized in the data, was that they would have similar benefit for psychotic illness, but fewer side effects. But risperidone, I think, kind of captures a lot of the difficult compromises. So you're looking for the least worst option.
Yeah.
Living with a psychotic illness is absolutely dreadful. And if you can persuade somebody to engage in treatment, you can really see very clear improvements in quality of life, but you can also see it coming at a cost often of side effects, even with risperidone. And then risperidone also, I think, has a really interesting history in terms of the evidence around it. So in Bad Pharma, in the clinical trial design section, which is basically a clinical trials textbook, but with how not to do it rather than how to do it, which is, after all, what a clinical trials textbook is. There's a thing that happens still reasonably commonly of people choosing a comparator for their new drug that is not very good in order to make their drug look really good. And the example of risperidone in the book is that when newer antipsychotics were being developed, newer than risperidone, people started putting their new antipsychotic up against risperidone, but in doses of 8 milligrams a day rather than, you'd start somebody on one twice a day, 2, 4. And what's interesting about 8 is not outrageous and illegal. It's not outside the range in the BNF. It wouldn't get you struck off, but it is peculiarly high.
Pretty big, yeah.
And it's peculiarly high enough that it's going to make your new drug look like it's much better in terms of side effect profile. And then lastly, risperidone obviously came up for us when we first started looking at the prescribing data through, I think, some actually really creative lenses and created collectively between us all, where we were running analyses trying to interrogate the data, really to refine it, not for bad practice, but to refine it for interestingness. So we came up with clever ways, including kurtosis, to try and identify the individual drugs that exhibited the most disagreement between clinicians about what proportion of that class of drug should be made up by one member of that class of drug. So if you do that, kurtosis is quite a clever way of doing it, and you rank by kurtosis every drug class pair as a proportion. And what you find at the top of it is pericyaxine. So pericyaxine...
It was mentioned yesterday.
We saw yesterday, yeah. Pericyaxine is an extraordinarily obscure antipsychotic drug.
Big in Norfolk, though.
Really big in Norfolk. So it's 1 in 5 of all prescriptions in Norfolk to this day, but it's used almost nowhere else. And if you look on PubMed today, you'll find about 80 entries for it ever, some of which are us going, this is weird, why are people in Norfolk using pericyaxine? Whereas risperidone and olanzapine will have 8,000 and 16,000 entries each. Yeah. So, risperidone has followed me. And
risperidone's a really good example of a drug that's promoted as a cure almost, and whereas... I'm not sure
I agree, actually.
Well, I mean, as in how it's... I suppose what I'm talking about is when we're funding things, we're funding the drug plus the services that support that use of the drug, and what we're seeing now sometimes is the funding goes towards the drug at the expense of the services that support it. And I suppose that's what I mean by risperidone being promoted as the cure. It's part of a package of care that is the cure. But if we're careful, we lean quite a lot into the drug, don't we? And that's happening more and more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, your local experience may be different. I'm really struck, actually, by, I think in all of medicine, the thing that's very attractive about doctors as people, actually, is their pragmatism and their how realistic and practical they often are. And I actually feel psychiatrists, in the way that they talk about antipsychotics, are actually really very, very realistic in my experience, and I've always really admired that. I think it's the place where it in some respects harder to do evidence-based practice than anywhere else, harder to do data science than anywhere else. Renal medicine, I mean, God, I had a renal house officer job. There's too much data in renal medicine. They did twice-a-day ward rounds. It's harder to do that kind of data-driven work in psychiatry, but I think I feel like the psychiatrists that I speak to are actually really pragmatic about, you're modifying the probabilities of someone's future.
You'll be pleased to know that risperidone hadn't been in the Aural Apothecary formulary, but we had clozapine twice, including Professor Stephen Vizier, who picked
and Lisa Green. Yes.
Well, I mean, clozapine and lithium are also beautiful illustrations of the challenges of logistics, because they're both extremely effective treatments with a challenging side effect profile, and so a requirement for regular blood monitoring. And it's not about individuals, it's about services. You know, if services are set up to make it easy for people to do the right thing, then it's easy to get people to engage with clozapine and lithium. If it's, you can't say to one doctor with one patient, just give them clozapine and do it properly, because you need the furniture and the infrastructure around you. You need the railway.
I think it's the point that I was trying to make. Donepezil is another classic example.
And we were talking about lithium at midnight last night in the pub, which doesn't happen very often, doesn't it? So that's another side effect of it.
There's Orla here. Oh, there's Orla.
Okay, so the second thing for the Aural Apothecary playlist, which actually is on Spotify, is what would you choose as a piece of music as your career anthem?
Well, you said nothing fatuous and showy-offy, so I can't give you any...
Authentic we want, Ben.
No difficult contemporary classical. Vitamin C by Can.
Don't know that.
Oh, so Can are like really angular 1970s krautrock.
Okay.
But really dance like a snake. They're good. You will enjoy it. It is accessible, difficult music. But also Damo Suzuki, who's the lead singer of Can, who was Japanese, living in Germany, often improvised lyrics in kind of a jumble of phonemes, which is easier to do in somebody else's language, I think, than your own, because the brain naturally imposes verbal structures on that become quite limiting. But he died very recently, but I've seen him live a gazillion times because he did something called the Never Ending Tour, which I think is genuinely... Well, never ending. Well, it did end. Yeah, sad. But his shtick on the Never Ending Tour was he didn't have a band. He would post on his website the places where he was going to go, and his agent would book a venue, and then he would say in every town that he went to, any local bands can send in a tape of themselves, and he would either pick a band and show up and just improvise with them, or sometimes he would go, I'd like the bassist from that band, the drummer from that band, and the saxophonist from that band, and they'd come together, and it would always be great in a very different way. And that kind of spontaneous...
Like jazz?
Well, no, but not like jazz, because it was often really poppy. So anyway, so spontaneous composition.
By Can, go on. It's a very eclectic mix, all sorts on there, from jazz to... What are the big numbers? The most choices have been Bach...
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd have got the most.
Bach and Pink Floyd neck and neck.
Third thing is a book choice for our listeners and for the Aural Apothecary Library. What is it and why?
Well, I'm a big fan of books, and people should read more books. And books become more important the more distracted and distractible you become in the age of the internet. He waves his finger. I think also the thing about books is it's a person bringing structure to something and doing a story with a beginning and a middle and end. And there's nothing more annoying than a book where you can tell they've had one idea and they've spun it out over 80,000 words instead of 8.
Yes. Bad Pharma's not like that.
Well, thanks. So anyway, in that spirit, I would say, partly because we're talking about data, but I often go back to it, Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott. He's a political scientist from somewhere in America, and Seeing Like a State is an extraordinary, long and detailed and wise history of the mad human project of trying to capture all of the ambiguity and uncertainty of the world in structured data, and where that's gone well and where it's gone badly, and where it has perversely changed a lot of the ways that people and states behave, because it's all about how the state can make its citizens legible to the state. And it's also particularly good because most of it is absolutely bang on, and then every now and then there's a leap which is so preposterous but also kind of relatable, and you're not quite sure if you buy it. Like he argues and spins it out into a whole separate book that wheat won out over potatoes as a source of starch, because states found it more desirable and legible because it was easier to tax or nick or measure. So if you show up at a village and say, I'm having 30% of your crops, and it's wheat, you can just grab 30% of their wheat. If you show up and there's a field full of potatoes, the peasants are quite likely to go, help yourself, the ground is quite cold. So, it's a brilliant book.
So, Seeing Like a Steak by James C. Scott. Well, thank you very much for your 3 choices.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, round of applause,
Yeah,
please. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, Ben, you can probably have a sit down, I think.
Oh.
So thank you. Rest your weary legs, folks. Thanks once again to Ben for his time. Thanks to Ben and Brian and the team for involving us in the conference. Ben shared his Desert Island Drug, his career anthem, and his book for our library. And thanks, to you, our live studio audience, for making us feel so at home, for your support. It's been recorded, so I hope you've grabbed the QR code to, if you haven't listened to the podcast already, there's plenty of back episodes, and after spending the last couple of days with you, there is something for everyone on the last 80-odd episodes. So thank you very much. Lovely to see you all. You have been listening to a 3 Apothecaries production.
Thank you.
If you listen right to the end of every podcast, it then finishes with, thanks for listening to the Aural Apothecary podcast, where we always dispense with accuracy.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.